All right, we are live streaming. We're ready to rock. Let's do this. Okay, we are talking about never rebuild your website from scratch again. This is actually similar to another webinar we did back in February, but we've got lots of updated content, lots of updated experiential stuff to talk about. Really excited about getting back to this topic and revisiting it, especially after some of the stuff that's happened, you know, both with us personally and in the company that we're working for right now.
Well, and the industry itself too has evolved a lot, even the last, few months.
That's right. So, an important slide to talk about everything. We put this in every one of our presentations. We're here to learn about each other. And we're in sort of this learning experience together. We want folks to ask questions. It's okay to interrupt. So use the chat, use the questions feature, put up your hand. Let's make this as interactive as possible. If you're watching this on a live stream, use the chat or message us, follow us on Twitter, message us there and just connect, email us, whatever, follow us on the website. Just keep along because, we've been doing these webinars for about 8 months now. And what we find is that just learn so much more and we keep coming back to the same topics because things are evolving really, really quickly. And we want to keep up to date with what's going on.
And if you see my dog chewing things in my background, please let me know because I don't have anyone else here to watch over her and she can get a little rambunctious. I did take her for a walk just before this, but you never know. And that's what we get with live streaming.
We've both gone with the no virtual background, so anything can happen in the background today. So yeah, hopefully everything's all good there. So just to introduce my co-presenter today, this is James Vidler, VP of Product at Agility CMS with me. James is a fairly recent dog owner, so really enjoying the adventures with James and his dog. I love how your dog is like at 5 o'clock. She knows when it's time for you to be done work.
Oh yeah.
She's like, we're going for a walk now. You have no choice.
I can't work past 5 o'clock anymore. It's terrible.
I think, and James, you had a huge product release yesterday where you guys shipped out. We shipped out the new content modeling section of Agility CMS. So congrats on that. Huge achievement. A lot of work gone into that, thousands of hours.
Right. Yeah, thank you. We really wanted to focus on making, giving you all sorts of users, not just developers, control over how they architect and construct, define, and validate their content. And I think we've been able to launch a feature that, makes it much faster and easier to use. And it's just a lot more in your face so that you can really iterate over your content model over time. So very proud of that. If you guys haven't checked it out, check it out.
Yeah, and I'm Joel Vardy, president here at Agility CMS, and really happy to be talking today about never rebuild your website from scratch again. Hopefully I won't lose my voice. Here we go, let's get started. One of the things we want to talk about is JAMstack. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today really isn't necessarily to do just about not rebuilding your website, but how you should be building websites today and why, if you have a website that's not built on something modern like JAMstack, how you don't have to rebuild the whole thing and throw out everything that you have to move to a newer, a more modern sort of technology, especially on the front end. So let's talk a little bit about what is JAMstack and what goes into that. So this is a review for a lot of these folks, but for some folks still coming into it or just coming into it for the first time.
Yeah, and I think it's always important to reiterate this stuff too, because like I said, things change and there's lots of terminology out there. So yeah, I really feel like it's our job to really make it very clear how things are, and especially to revisit this.
Yeah, we're all in a journey. Some folks may be more familiar with this than others. So let's go through. So JAMstack stands for stands for JavaScript, APIs, and markup. That really make up sort of these things get combined and used all together in order to generate websites and apps on the internet. And it's pretty straightforward that, this eliminates a lot of other things. It doesn't talk about things like there's no PHP, there's no .NET. The only language involved really as a sort of programming language is JavaScript, although you could kind of argue that HTML and CSS are programming languages as well, but primarily JavaScript is the thing that does the logic. And then you have APIs where you're going to pull data. And we're going to talk a lot about CMS APIs to pull in content to be used in JavaScript and to be combined into markup. And
what do you think is so special about JavaScript? Like, why do you think the industry has sort of landed on JavaScript as sort of common denominator?
Well, that's something that I think about a lot. And I remember when you first brought up this terminology with me, like a couple of years ago when we first talked about it, I thought, JavaScript is just not powerful enough to do what it needs to do. But That's completely incorrect. It is the most dynamic, I would say, the most evolved language that we have in terms of how many iterations have gone through about it. I'm coming from like a C#, Java, C++ background. JavaScript is kind of hard to tell apart from those languages now. You could use TypeScript as well, but I think JavaScript is just so flexible and so useful and so fast and honestly fun to work with. I have started coding with it almost exclusively in new projects personally.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things too is that, you know, if you, as a developer, if you know JavaScript, you can do a lot with that. You're not just limited to, you know, adding some small functionality on a website anymore. You can build an entire site on it, or, you know, build something that's going to run in a smart TV. Right?
Yeah, and we talk about, you know, you did a webinar last week about your X's, which is you can actually go, folks, you can go watch the experience of that, the experiences webinar. That recording is on YouTube. But you talked about, you know, editor experience, developer experience is right up there, and I think JavaScript gives the best developer experience because it enables like 80% of the world's developers who know JavaScript. It enables those folks to be able to be super productive. So JAMstack, I think, is a great framework to use to start with developer experience, but also we can build great things. Let's talk about frameworks. This notion is really linked directly to JAMstack because I think when we think of JavaScript, I think of frameworks. I don't know about you, James.
Yeah, it's like what's the sort of you know, because there's JavaScript, but then there's sort of flavors of JavaScript or implementations of JavaScript that differ into different camps. So I guess we'll take a look at what those are. Yeah.
So I mean, and I think the biggest one, and the one with probably the most history out there, that's not jQuery, we're not going to list that as a framework, is React. React is sort of the basis for a lot of the research that's gone into how JavaScript can be used both on the server and in the client in all kinds of different ways. There's flavors of React that are used for mobile apps in React Native. There's React that runs on the server. It runs primarily on top of Node on the server. Just an amazing framework. Actually, just from your point of view, James, do you like function-based components or class-based components? I'm a function-based component with hooks. That's what I find.
I've converted to being a functional JavaScript developer, as opposed to classes. Yeah.
I think if you're sort of in between two different camps of frameworks, folks tend to be between React or Vue. Vue is another framework. It's a little different, where in React, everything is JavaScript. Everything fits into JavaScript, whereas in Vue, everything fits more into like this is the HTML template, this is the JavaScript part, this is the CSS part. It kind of flips about. So Vue is another big one. I took to Vue from .NET more quickly than React, but now I think I like React more. We also have Angular. Angular is kind of like the third cousin. But lots of folks love Angular, and it's a really cool component-based model. And I think if you are into any one of these frameworks, then you are a good setting for the future of being really productive. But you could be a vanilla JavaScript person. The question was, is Angular still a thing? Angular is still a thing. I think we're on version like 9 of Angular or something. It just came out. So Angular is certainly a thing, and having used it myself, I think it's great as a front-end framework. Especially, it follows a lot of the same paradigms as these other things, as React and Vue. I personally like React, and I think that's where the most sort of research is being done. But I could be wrong on that. And there's lots of other frameworks popping up all the time. And
I think at the end of the day, you're going to use, you know, whatever you're most productive at. So if you come from an Angular background, and build an Angular. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So even on top of these frameworks, we have what's called static site generators. And so, you know, there's like, we start off with the notion of JAMstack and JavaScript, which is kind of a low-level concept. And we come up to frameworks, which you can do a lot with a lot of frameworks, and there's tons of different flavors and things within those frameworks and different versions. Even within React, you can have, you know, hey, I'm a class-based person, or hey, I'm a function-based person, hooks, whatever. But then we have these idea of static site generators, of which I think GATSBY has taken the internet by storm. Has just, you know, huge number of following of GATSBY as an open source project where you can build really great, super fast, really accessible websites really fast in a way that is like, it just works really, really well. I know when I first started using it, that it really clicked with me, even though it's kind of complicated, probably because the documentation on gatsbyjs.org is so great.
Yeah, and there's such an active community there too that, you know, it's just easy to find anything. There's an example that someone has done of something somewhere.
Yeah, and the question on from Jay was, what static site generator is beginner friendly? That's a tough question because it kind of depends on where you're coming from. I know for me, the first one I looked at was Gatsby because it clicked with me because of the name, because I read the Great Gatsby novel. I kid you not. That's how I came across it. But it really clicked with me because the documentation is amazing. And they are is such a friendly community of folks that are there. So really, really great. And I you know, when we were linking up just over a year ago, when we were linking up Agility more closely with Gatsby and starting our partnership, we were, you know, contributing to the Gatsby source. And like the first time that we contributed to, you know, the Gatsby has a huge mono repo on Git, we contributed some documentation and they send you swag just for contributing. So like, they're really, really friendly. And their product, which is monetization of, so it's an open source framework, which is gatsbyjs.org, which is like the NPM package and the CLI tools you use to build websites. But they also have Gatsby Cloud, that is basically their monetization of their platform, which is really the best place to do Gatsby builds and previews. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, James.
No, I think you sort of hit it on the head there. But yeah, Gatsby does definitely take a unique approach to how you build sites. It's very much you need to build things in the Gatsby way. So I would say, you know, the question was, you know, which one's the most beginner friendly? You kind of have to learn the Gatsby way of doing things. But that being said, their docs are so great. So if you just have some time and a little bit of patience, it's, you know, it's not that complicated to learn, and you can start off simple. Of course, you know, anything gets complicated once you start going down the path, but you can start off simple.
Yep. So the next one that I think has actually been around a little bit longer. So Gatsby's been around, I think, since 2014, 2015. Just a little bit before that was a product called Next, which is it's an open source project. It's also based on top of React. So Gatsby is based on top of React and uses GraphQL as its sort of query language internally. And then Next is based on React and doesn't really have a query language, but does a lot of things for you to help you build a site and the static site generation part of Next is actually kind of new, right, James?
Yeah, they actually started, so Next.js initially started off just as like a wrapper around Create React app. So when React sort of first came out, they did this, oh yeah, cool, you have this React thing where you have this client-side application that can do things. And it's like, okay, great, that works awesome for Facebook. But it's like, how can I use that on a website when it needs to be SEO friendly, it needs to be like server rendered? That's where Next.js sort of came into play. So they sort of built a wrapper around Create React apps so that you can create React applications that actually, you know, allow you to run server-side code. So it essentially allows you to run a React site on a server to server generate things. And that was great for a long time. But, you know, as JAMSTAck has sort of come out and become very popular, Next has sort of shifted their focus a little bit more to be, you can still do a server-side rendered Next.js site, but you can also set it up to be statically generated beforehand. And the really cool thing about that is that Next.js actually allows you to mix and match things as well. So if you have a site that, you know, for some portions of it, it just has to be server rendered and you know, real time, you can actually have some pages set up that way and then have all your other pages statically generated beforehand. Still needs to run on a server, but you can take a lot of the benefits of that you know, having a statically built HTML page gives you, you know, without having to convert your entire site to something like that.
And I think that's where the company who basically supports that project the most, the Next.js project, is called Vercel. They have a hosting platform that used to be called Zeit. So actually, the previous versions of these slideshows that we're going through all had Zeit all the way through it, but now they've rebranded as Vercel. And I would say that is their claim to fame for monetizing the Next.js deployments, because you can deploy a site on Vercel, a Next.js site, which in one deployment you can set up, you can have preview, it does the build, and you can have those serverless functions that does the dynamic stuff all just in one deployment. And it's like really simple.
Yeah, it's really a one-stop shop for a site. There's less configuration required than Gatsby. You know, you don't have to set up a very unique, specific preview environment or anything like that. So they're doing a lot of really cool things, and a lot of this is new, stuff over the last couple of months. So they're moving really fast, and we've had a lot of conversations with the Vercel team, and they've been really quick to take feedback from us in terms of how we want to integrate with them and that kind of thing. And they're really going after Netlify hard. And there's actually tons of documents that actually show Vercel is actually faster than Netlify in both builds and when you actually say deployed on their CDN. So while Netlify is very popular and it's a great platform in its own right, highly recommend checking out Vercel, especially if you're going to be using Next.js. It's just perfect for it.
Yep. You're jumping ahead of our presentation a little bit, but that's awesome. I'd like to talk about how. So there's like a lot of these things. There's like the open source project, and then there may be like the monetization, which is usually some kind of like either build server or hosting for it. So the next one that's I think pretty popular is called Nuxt, which I have always thought of as it's like kind of like the Vue copycat of Next. But I think that these systems actually trade back and forth. And I just noticed that Nuxt now has complete static generation, just like Next does. And Next actually borrowed a couple of logical pieces from them as well. So if you're on Vue, Nuxt is a good one to look at.
Mm-hmm. I think there's another one, Gridsome, that I've heard about too, but haven't had a chance to check that out.
There are lots, and there's another one. So if you're on Angular, there's a static site generator for that. So it's kind of like the next generation of, if you have a framework, what's the static site generator on top of that? Svelte is another one that I think is gaining in popularity, and there's a static site generator for that called Sapper. So there's frameworks out the yin yang. For us, and so 11T, if you're on, if you want to basically have the most bare bones vanilla JavaScript, you just need to generate static HTML, CSS, and JS without any framework. 11T is the one for you. And I think 11T, if you're building a site where it needs to be super static and like as fast as possible in terms of the output, like no framework and 11T is the way to go there. So we have some source code examples too on our dev.to and in our some other places for using 11T. Okay.
Cool.
The two that Agility has chosen to use for our starters. So if you go to agilitycms.com and it's like get started as a developer or whatever, there are two starters that we have set up for you that basically say, this is how we think you should be using Gatsby next on top of React, and connection to Gatsby Cloud and Vercel. So those are the two that we think are the ones that we're gonna handle, mostly because we can't support all of them in terms of like code samples. Agility you can use with anything, and pretty much any headless CMS you can use with any static site generator. It's a question of getting started. So we've decided, okay, we need to help the world get started with Gatsby and Next.js because I think that they're just incredible platforms. So those are available on our website. How does this actually work? How does the DevOps work with JAMstack? James, you want to take us through it?
Sure, yeah. And this is obviously something you really need to take into account when it comes to JAMstack because, the way JAMstack differs from, regular traditional sites is you sort of pre-build your website and you pre-build all of your HTML before you actually deploy it. Whereas a traditional site running on a web server will actually respond to requests dynamically and, provide that HTML in real time. That sounds great in practice, but what happens if you're responding to a request that relies on accessing some slow resources, or maybe they weren't slow yesterday, but today they are. Now all of a sudden your site is slow. So with static site generation, that sort of solves that problem inherently by building those pages before they're actually deployed. So that's the role of the build server here, is building and compiling all of your HTML for your pages beforehand. And in that process, your build time of what might happen, that it's going to take your code, it's going to go and source all of your content from whether that's in a headless CMS or like a custom database, and it's going to merge those into an HTML document for you. And then, and you'll have CSS and JS that is all around that too. So all this stuff is done beforehand. Great part about that is that even if you have a slow dependency or something like that, or like a database that you don't want to get hammered on your website, it doesn't matter. You can just have it get hit within your build process. And your build process, may take, anywhere from a few seconds to a few minutes. It depends how much stuff you're actually doing in there.
Cool. And we're going to come back to the importance of how that all works. But sort of the idea is, why would I want to migrate to JAMstack? And you hit a few of those things on the head, James, already when you talked about it. I think the first one, better page speed and reliability. marketing sends out an email, or there's a big sort of thing out on the internet where somebody links to our site, links to the homepage, links to like a blog page that went viral. That page is much less likely to go down on JAMstack because there's no server rendering involved. It's just a static HTML page that's there, and it's going to work. Much more reliable, and usually way faster.
There's no chance for a request to come in and something bad to happen during the response, because really all it's doing is just serving up a file that's there. It's like requesting an image that you've already uploaded, as opposed to generating the image on demand, right? It's that sort of idea.
I think there's more UX possibilities. A lot of times people come to us like, hey, we have a PHP site or a .NET site or a Java-based site, and it looks like 2005 or it looks like 2010. The user experience is crap. And I think what happens is, even though you could build a good website on any platform, you could build a good website on PHP or whatever, it can look however it needs to look. But it tends to be, we follow the examples that are out there and sort of best practice guides. And honestly, if you're building like a Java site or .NET site, it tends to look like when you started that like it's whenever that sort of starter package came out or whatever, and they tend to be a little older. So JAMstack is built on front-end technologies. The user experience tends to be a lot better, just because I think it's way easier to update those front-end packages.
Mm-hmm. I just want to answer one of the questions here. The question is, can we take an existing site built with HTML and CSS and convert it to one of these static things? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And there's actually a couple different ways to do that, which I think we're gonna cover it in the next slide.
Yeah, but a lot of the times, I think that's a good case for 11T, personally. But it all depends on what it is. So it's a good point. Simplifying workflow in DevOps. I think this is a huge thing. JAMstack, one of the things is it comes with examples of great ways of doing workflow in DevOps, and it's getting better all the time. Whereas a lot of older technologies are often X-copy deploys, where developer builds the thing on their machine and does some stuff and does a copy file, sending it to a server. Like, that's just not a great way of doing things. So JAMstack usually comes with, and that's why I like Gatsby Cloud for Seller so great, because they plug them right, connect to your GitHub account, and does the deploy automatic.
Yeah, and simplifying the workflow. If you're thinking of how your code is being deployed, one of the things JAMstack does that we saw in the previous slide is it does combine your code and your content all in one package, that one immutable package that can only be replaced. So that means, as opposed to having a traditional web server where you're responding to requests that are coming in dynamically, your code is like static. Your code's not going to change, but the content that you may be accessing externally, like from a CMS, that may change at any time. So, if you have a case where you expect certain content to come back from an API, and then all of a sudden it's different, or, not a case that you may have accounted for, that could actually potentially take down your site if you're not careful, right? So, there's no question of, we have this code base, but then we have these states of this content. That can get kind of confusing to wrap your head around. With JAMstack, it actually simplifies that, because you say, hey, I want to, update the version of my site. That's going to take your code and your content all at once, all at the same go. So you can be confident and roll back to previous versions of your site at any time without even having to go back to your data source. So for example, let's say you rolled out a campaign in your Headless CMS like Agility, you published a bunch of things, and then you realized, oh shoot, I wasn't supposed to do that today, or something like that. Normally and you have to roll back. Normally, the way you would do that previously is you go into the CMS and just start like unpublishing things and try to get things back to the state of how you had it before. But in the JAMstack world, you actually don't really have to do that. All you have to do is just go to your, like, let's say you have this hosted in Vercel or Netlify. Those keep all of your previous versions of your site, so you can just roll back to like, I just want my website to be back to what it was yesterday. And then you can worry about adjusting the content and everything until you're satisfied with the next version. Then you can make a new update.
Awesome. A lot of information there. Conversations with James Fiddler are often conversations like that, where there's so much information and there's just so much knowledge there about how to work with stuff. So I think that we need to continue these conversations, because like just with workflow and DevOps with JAMstack, there's a lot to talk about and a lot of different situations on how you can make your life better. JAMstack is more secure. There are just simply fewer attack vectors, because everything gets built on a build server that's usually not accessible over the internet. can't actually hit that build server, with an HTTP request or anything like that. Stuff gets built, and then it gets copied into the actual place where it's going to be accessible over the internet. So it's way more secure, way more reliable. It's just there's no place to hack it.
Yeah, and there's no way to dynamically change the response of a URL either. There's no way to inject something in there that's going to cause problems, because you control that entire deployment, and it's not like you're going to introduce a bug where someone types in some text in a weird way. It's going to inject some like cross-site scripting attack or something.
Oh man, all that stuff. So yeah, you still have to do good coding practices and whatnot, but the number of attack vectors in your site they really go down to a very low number. How do we host this stuff? We already talked about a couple of hosting options, but there's a couple of things that are like right out of the box. How do I host this? Of course, you can do something like Azure or AWS. So those are like two of the major. You can also do, I didn't put Google Cloud on here as well. You can also do those. So any of the major cloud providers, you can host a JAMSTACK site on there. But I think that the two that we've talked about that are a little more exciting because they're really tuned specifically for JAMSTACK are Netlify, where you have the sort of everything, it does all in one, the build plus the edge plus the CDN, as well as Vercel. And I think if you're on Next.js in particular, although it does support a lot of the other frameworks as well, Vercel is incredible because it does the build plus edge plus CDN plus the serverless plus domains, everything. So Netlify and Vercel they're in a feature war, I would say right now, where it's like they're trying to one up each other with deployments, and their free options are incredible. So you can get started with those for free, and you can run your website for free for a long time on those guys.
Yeah, so if you want the lowest barrier to entry or something simple, go with Netlify Vercel. If you need a lot more granular control and you know exactly what you're doing and how you want to do it, and you want to try to sort of do things your own way, that's when I'd probably look at something like Azure or AWS. But in most cases, those are overkill.
Yep. And you could, and there's a hybrid cloud approach that you could use as well. So you could have some of your legacy stuff that you were previously hosting in Azure or AWS, as well as put some stuff in Netlify and Vercel. And Netlify and Vercel are built, interestingly enough, on top of those lower level clouds. Netlify and they're both multi-cloud solutions. So these are like stuff that's been built on top of those cloud providers already. So let's dig in just a little bit more about how AWS and or Azure or Google Cloud would host a JAMSTACK site. So I would say these are the big ones. These are the big cloud providers. If you're an enterprise organization, typically people are going to want to say, hey, I want to go with Azure or AWS, although more enterprises are going with Netlify and Vercel. There are tons of services on here that have nothing to do with JAMSTACK. So that can be confusing. They offer pretty low level storage and CDN packages, although there are new things that are coming out that are more tuned towards JAMSTACK, because this is picking up huge sort of momentum in the industry. So AWS Amplify is a great sort of like getting started thing that I think that was actually a lot of the inspiration for some other stuff came from AWS Amplify. It's been around for a while, but it is really tuned for I think JAMSTACK. And then you have a really new offering that's in preview. It's actually, I think it's free in preview right now, Azure Static Web Apps. So you can literally have it, say, hey, I want to take this GitHub repo that has my, GATSBY app and deploy it in an Azure Static Web App.
Yeah, it's pretty bare bones right now, but it does work. And so if there are options for you, if you have a rule that says, hey, I need to have this on Azure or AWS, you can definitely do it.
Yeah, and I think what this shows is that these big providers are saying JAMSTACK is for real. Static site generation is legit the best way to go. We're all throwing pitches in the strike zone right now. This is the way to do stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about Netlify in particular. So Netlify has, as James was talking before, the idea of atomic builds. And Vercel does the same thing, where as my site does a build, I have that at a particular timestamp, and all the files that were built at that time are there for me. So if I want to go back to it and check or even revert to that, I can totally do that.
Or even just go back and for reference, being like, hey, what did our site look like last month? And you can just open it up and be like, and browse around as if it was last month. It's pretty cool.
Storage is so cheap that keeping a copy of your whole website, it used to seem like a crazy idea, but storage is so cheap and such a commodity that this is really important. Really easy. It's edge delivery. So it does it all at once. You put your site into this sort of storage container, but it's delivered over the CDN really fast. So it gives you that sort of by default. It does give you the ability to do serverless functions. Now, if you're deploying a GATSBY site on Netlify, it does get a little trickier, but Netlify has tons of documentation on how to do serverless functions. It's really, really easy. It's based on the idea of like a Lambda query, a Lambda function, which was an AWS thing, but now everyone's on top of serverless functions.
And we should probably, clarify, like why would someone use a serverless function in a JAMSTAC site?
Well, James, I think that there's always something you need that's dynamic, right? As you're saying before, we were talking about next, there's always something you need. Like, what if I need to log in? What if I need to submit something and get something back from like a database where we don't want that to be statically rendered? We don't want to be,
submit a form submission or something like that, right?
Right. So I think Netlify's been adding tons of features that are filling out the rest of those edge cases of, but what if, but what if, but what if. So serverless functions do that. They have the idea of instant forms. So you have like a form tag, you put I think you just put the word Netlify beside it, and you can submit that to Netlify automatically. It has oops, I'm going back too fast. It has an identity. Like, I can't even keep up in my slides with these things. There's like an identity thing. There's analytics, there's whatever. Like agilitycms.com is hosted on Netlify right now. Mostly because, hey, let's just use it for real and make sure that it's for real. And it is for real. So just in terms of like this presentation, Agility CMS was hosted in Azure on an app service with .NET as of April? March and April was when we started doing, hey, let's just take a few pages and move it over. We moved it to
our own website, agilitysms.com.
Our own website, agilitysms.com. Yeah, not the app, the actual, just the front end website. Built on .NET and hosted for hundreds of dollars per month it would cost in Azure, which was great for Microsoft. Bad for anybody, it's for sure. It's like there's no question that the cloud portion of Microsoft is what has driven their stock through the roof, right? And it's amazing. But we can literally host on Netlify pretty much for free. The build portion of it costs like dollars per month for the build, which is actually happening on Gatsby Cloud. So much less to host a website, and it's way faster and much more secure. So it's just, there were a lot of things that were great. There are a lot of things that are great about Azure and hosting, app services and whatnot that made it way easier than hosting on like virtual machines and stuff. This is the next level to that.
Yeah, and one of the common things I get when I'm talking to devs about JAMSTAC is I always get the same thing come up. Is they're always like, yeah, well, I'd love to use JAMSTAC, but our client or our stakeholder, we have some dynamic data, so we can't use JAMSTAC. And that's not entirely true, and that's where serverless functions and things like instance forms, these are these sort of other services that these static hosting providers are providing to sort of bridge that gap, where it's like, no, you actually can have some dynamic stuff. And those are serverless functions, and those are infrastructure you don't need to manage, and you pay for as many times as you use them. So like our entire agilitysms.com website is built on Gatsby, and we have a whole bunch of forms on there doing a whole bunch of different things. And we're actually, I think in this case, we're using Azure Logic Apps to post data, I think in some cases, but we could very easily be using Netlify instant forms or a custom serverless function.
Question just came over. What if hypothetically Agility CMS APIs goes down? Do you have an offline solution, or what is your plan if it will happen? So interestingly enough, with JAMSTAC, that's kind of the point. You're going to build your site using any API. So that build will then fail if those APIs go down for whatever reason. So the build will fail and it will just stop. So the previous version of your website will still be up. So your website won't go down. No. This is actually a bigger thing, not just because CMS APIs are usually pretty good. They're hosted behind CDNs themselves, and they have all kinds of stuff to be redundant and make sure they stay up. So like 99.99% of the time, those are good. It can still go down. That's possible. More than likely, your custom APIs against custom databases and stuff. And if you have, say you had like a movie review database or something where you had some other custom old school API, that's the more likely thing to go down or be slow. And that will not cause your website to go down if it's like that. So the volatile resource dependency of your website kind of goes away, which is pretty amazing. Let's talk. Ooh, there was something on the chat, not a question, just a statement. I'm a front-end dev just getting started with JAMSTAck. My biggest pain point is that whenever I look at the documentation, it assumes a level of knowledge I don't have, usually about JavaScript, and has poor availability of examples for me to study or copy and paste from. I can create JSON, but I struggle to get something like 11t to utilize the data. Wow, that is very indicative. You are not alone.
No, you're not alone in that.
Yeah. So that is literally why we do these webinars, in hopes that people will reach out, and people have been reaching out to us personally and saying, let's get together and talk about this. So two of the things that we've done are these webinars to help just get general information, but we do training that actually walk you through starting from scratch with a starter. We use Agility CMS starters, but it literally gives you the starting point for a lot of different tools. And those are actually on the Agility CMS YouTube page right now. There's a GATSBY one, and there's a Netlify or a Next.js one. Haven't done an 11t one yet, but we will be doing more. So that would be something that you can look at. Another question just came up. Love to see a user development forum. Agility has that at help.agilitycms.com.
Yeah, and I just want to elaborate on that point where it's like, hard to get started. It assumes a lot of knowledge of JavaScript. And I think, it's very difficult if you're starting from scratch on something, because it's like you need to know how all that stuff works. But what I find has helped sort of train other developers in getting into JAMSTAck, because I speak to a lot of developers that come from a .NET background that are just starting to sort of make the change. They may have a little bit of JavaScript, but really that's not their primary skill. And that's usually what we recommend, like Joel said, starting off with like a starter template, a site that is already kind of built and has some examples in there for you, so that over time you can sort of go over that code and sort of digest it a little bit, make some slight modifications here and there, but you don't have to build everything out from scratch, because that's a pretty big undertaking. So I think when you're first starting off on something, try to start with something that has the most complete sort of template you can find. And that's, I find that personally is a good way of learning, is just starting from someone else's stuff.
Yeah. If you sign up for a free Agility account, so Agility has free forever accounts, basically, go there. There are two templates. There's a Next.js template and a GATSBY.js template that are pretty fully featured, and we are just going to continue to add more features to those. Those are a great place to get started. I just posted a link to the Agility Developer Slack channel, to our Slack community. Please get on there. We love getting developers on there, getting questions and starting to talk about stuff and going through different problems and experiences. That's literally how James and I learned about stuff. And we're on a Slack channel there's another JAMstack Slack channel, and we have folks from GATSBY and Vercel on Slack, and that's how we learn. We ask questions. Nobody is going to learn, like, documentation, even if it's good, it's hard because it's all written from a point of view. So if you can actually get connecting and talking with people, it's much easier. Let's talk a little bit about Vercel. Vercel, very, very similar in concept to Netlify. But I would say for Next.js, Vercel is next level, because as we were saying before, I can deploy to Vercel, and in that one deployment, I have the ability to do preview, I have the ability to do serverless functions, and I also have my Next.js site, which is a little less opinionated in how it does things than GATSBY. So GATSBY helps me do some things easier, but I just think it lets me do more of what I'm good at as a developer, and it's just an incredible framework on top.
Yeah, for those of you that are maybe are more familiar with like a Create React app, where that's pretty much all you need to know for Next.js. There's some concepts on top of that, but that's pretty much it. Whereas GATSBY does have a bit more of a learning curve, because there's a very GATSBY way of doing things with GraphQL and all that sort of stuff to wrap your head around. So kind of depends where you're coming from. But also to add to your point there, Joel, about Vercel, is another little known feature that they have is I think they call it stale while revalidate.
Yes.
And what that means is, typically the way that you get your site to be updated is, you go and you do a whole new build process, right? And that gets deployed. But in Vercel, you don't necessarily have to set it up that way. You could actually set it up so that your pages just update every 5, 10, 20 minutes, half an hour, 24 hours, whatever
without having to do a full build.
Without having to do a rebuild, because what will happen is Vercel's smart enough to know when a page was last requested. And it's like, oh, if it's, or when it was last built. So it's like, okay, this was built, 1 minute ago. 5 minutes from now, it's gonna be like, okay, this page is now stale. It'll go in the background, automatically update that content. So when the next user comes to it, they get the new content. So you can sort of have static, but also kind of dynamic data as well, because it gives you a chance to sort of re-execute those. And it's able to do that because Vercel the way they host the site is, they can run your site as a server, as essentially server side rendered, and then just cache the output. So it's really cool that you can set it up that way.
Yeah, I think if you look at Netlify and Vercel right now, look at who works for them. They're very well-funded companies. They're pretty new in terms of like their growth, but they have like a who's who of talent on the internet right now for designing stuff. So it's pretty great to talk to these folks because they're so smart. They're shipping things like daily. They have different stuff coming in, both for the open source stuff and the actual server side. GATSBY I put in there as well with those three companies. So just amazing, amazing stuff. So that was all preamble, by the way. Yeah. So that was all to show there's this amazing way to build websites that is just absolutely stupendous. That really is amazing.
Yeah.
So, another question here. What if we don't build from scratch and use a template? Then how about existing HTML, CSS files and designs we already have? Yeah. So I think the reason you'd start from a template is to learn how it happens, and then sort of like kind of throw that away after you've done some learning to say, okay, I kind of got my brain wrapped around this. And I liked some of the things that this starter did. And actually you could just use a starter and say, you know what, I'm just going to copy and paste some stuff into the starter and just go with that. But what we did was, well, I love some of these starters. I think we could do it a little different way. So we actually threw all that away and built our own website stuff. So that's when we were doing agilitycms.com from scratch. That's what we ended up doing after doing a bunch of learning. So there's there's the learning curve part of it. And then there's the actual, okay, I'm ready to start on my first real project.
Yeah. And there's also something wrong too with just like, take someone's existing template and just start making it your own. Replace their HTML with your HTML, right? And place their CSS with your CSS. Kind of depends on what you're doing, but that's another way to do it too.
So what now? So we're at the point where you have a website that it's a known entity. It does what it does. It's built on PHP or .NET, or maybe it's whatever static. So it's not hooked up to a CMS. It's a WordPress site, a little slower. Could be even a Squarespace site or whatever. It does what it does. It is what it is. Okay. Do I have to rebuild the whole thing in order to move to new technology? You absolutely could rebuild the whole thing. In some cases, that's a good idea if it's for a small site. If it's a big site, and say, my whole site's fine, except for my homepage gets hammered every Friday at 4 when people go to the movies, or go to the movies,
or a particular campaign or something is just, because we actually came up with this talk by talking to a lot of our enterprise customers that have big, large sites that, are built in a traditional way. They're server rendered, but they have these, they love the idea of JAMstack. They love the benefits. They bought into this. I want to start using this right away. And then they even have some campaigns and things that they run on a yearly basis where they have to scale up their service because they're going to get like 100,000 or a million, users coming to hit their site. They have to scale up, and they're paying, thousands of dollars a month for these kind of things. And so now we're saying, okay, well, how can we focus them to be like, okay, you can just implement JAMstack for these sort of areas that you really need it. And then you can sort of, start converting your other pages and other parts of your site to JAMstack over time. So that's really what we want to explain here about how you can do that.
Yeah. So the idea is, there's no excuse to not at least look at JAMstack and start moving to it. The excuse of, well, we already have this site and I don't want to have to rebuild everything. We don't have to do that. Part of Agility's sort of vision is a world where you never have to rebuild your website from scratch again. And that's our vision for the world. That's not a vision to try and sell you CMS, because that has actually nothing to do with CMS whatsoever. It's just what we believe. And we believe that you should not have to rebuild your website from scratch ever. Now, sometimes you want to. Sometimes you want to build the complete front end. But if you've picked a good strategy for your content, you could just keep the content and not have to rebuild everything. So there's a lot of situations where evolution versus revolution really works really well. So in this case, it means we can use JAMstack without rebuilding everything. And I think that's a really cool concept. And one of the ways, you can see my kids are walking around the apartment. It's pretty cool. You guys okay? Awesome. So we want to talk a little bit about edge computing. I mentioned it with Netlify a little bit, but the idea that we're trying to show here is, first of all, JAMSTAC's awesome. Talk to James Vidler on Slack, and he will go on for a long time about how it is. And he sold me on it. It's a good job. But if you already have a site and you have a few pages or a small portion of it, how can I just do that portion of the site? And we did this with agilitycms.com back in March because same deal, big site, lots of pages. I only want to fix the homepage or whatever. So how do we do that? We use edge computing. Edge computing works like this. You start off, you have browser requests come in, then they hit a CDN. So some sort of nodes that are out there around the globe that are close to my location, and then they are going to hit, a static HTML, CSS, JavaScript file. If I'm on a static, if I have a JAMSTAC-based site that's statically generated. If I'm on a server-based site, it's going to hit my server, right? And some folks don't even use a CDN, but you should. So we introduced that CDN as a concept in the middle. A CDN also has the ability to run, we're calling it edge logic. Some people call it server-side service workers. And there's a few different types. Basically, we can run a little bit of code in that CDN in the outside of a web server just to do a little bit of logic for us. And what that can do is say, okay, I can either decide to serve, somehow my phone decided that meant, hey Siri. That's weird. Anyway.
Apple wants to know. Apple wants to know.
And now back to the webinar. That's funny. So I can either hit, for a certain URL, either hit my legacy website, which is like, .NET, PHP, WordPress, whatever, or hit my static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript site. So we can pick between the two. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and we have some examples here. What that means is, like, here's an example. So I have, I have like a home page and a stats folder or something, and like a /microsite. Okay, it's like, yay, this is my promo that everyone got the email for. So everyone's going to hammer these 3 pages when that promo email gets sent out. Well, I don't want it to go to the legacy website for those. I only want to go to the static website for those URLs. I could do that, and my URL and what's in the browser is still going to say, www.mysite.com/stats, microsite, whatever.
Yeah, so you're not on a different domain or anything. From the user's perspective, they're all on the same site, but in reality, you actually have 2 different websites, and you're sort of smartly rerouting traffic to the right place, to the right website.
There you go. Yes. And there are a bunch of different edge services that can help you with this. 2 of which we've talked about already, and 2 of which we haven't. Hopefully my slide isn't messed up here, because I edited this slide last night. So we have, personally, when we first started doing this, we use StackPath. StackPath is a really great service. It used to be the old Max CDN, I think they bought, but they are a great sort of CDN and web application firewall, sort of everything all in one. Very similar to Cloudflare. A huge portion of the internet runs on Cloudflare, amazingly enough. They're a great company. So both StackPath and Cloudflare have what's called service workers. And we have some examples of that, how to do that with those things. Actually, if I was going to go and do it today, I would use Netlify or Vercel. Netlify and Vercel have the idea of writing basically a redirects file. And we have examples to show to say, hey, and it literally is just like, if it's this URL, go here. If it's that URL, go here. Otherwise, serve everything from the local spot. And
there's the URL stays the same, but internally it'll sort of rewrite and show you a different page. Yeah.
There's the concept of redirects, which is changing your URL and doing like an HTTP 301 or 302. That's changing your URL. But then there's a rewrite where it actually just passes the traffic through that CDN. And what's amazing is that you get the benefit of the CDN in front of your legacy web server in this case. So you're actually, not only will your site be able to have certain pages that are served through JAMSTAC, which has all those benefits, but your site actually will tend to go faster anyway. So I know that with Netlify, it uses, and Cloudflare. StackPath doesn't actually yet, they don't cache it, which is one of the things I learned. I thought they did, but they don't. Whereas some of the other services actually use the cache control portion of the HTTP response from the web server to cache it if you want it to be cached on the CDN to give better performance. So A lot of different services there. Really look at, the Vercel and Netlify for those, but, Cloudflare and StackPath also have a ton of benefits as well. So these are all pretty high level. You could also use there's also there's Akamai, there's Azure CDN, there's CloudFront. There's just so many products out there. At some point, you have to simplify it for your own decision making and just go with the things that are sort of easy to use. I'm going to show you how that logic works with StackPath and Cloudflare. Almost exactly the same sort of offering, similarly priced from both of them. I think they charge a very small, like $10 a month or something to add service workers on top of your plan. Might be part of the free plan, I don't remember. Regardless, what happens is you get a request that comes into that CDN, and then it runs a little bit of JavaScript. Okay, that language is everywhere, right? So here we go. So we have the handle request function in, and there's a request property, and we just basically parse out the URL. So in this case, if it says, oh yeah, the quotes are all messed up, but if the path has /posts in it, so in this case, we were like the whole /posts folder, it could be like our blog or whatever. In that case, the request.url is going to actually change the URL and do a rewrite to like mystatic-site.com and pull it across, okay? And by all means, connect with us later. I have a much more detailed, like when we did agilitycms.com, we started off with just the homepage. Then we did like page, different sections as we finished, converting them over. So it actually got really complicated by the time at the end, we just turned it all off and it just flipped all over to Netlify. So we've used this in the wild, works great. I've done it with both Cloudflare and StackPath. Amazing way of doing it. And it's in JavaScript. How do we do it in Netlify? Netlify there's actually two different ways. There's something called, I'm not going to show the TOML file. There's a .toml. I think there's an easier way. I usually do _redirects file. So basically you have this file on your site that is just like line by line. And this one says, hey, everything under the /posts star. So this is, like a wildcard, everything under here, go to like legacysite.com. And then they have this splat thing that represents this star, which is a little strange, but it was pretty well documented on the Netlify site. And then say do a 200. So it's pretty simple to basically do a whole bunch of, you can do redirects and rewrites this way for this. So this is like how to do a specific page. So say I wanted to change the About Us page. You could also do if the URL equals /. So really easy to set this up. I think if I was to go back and do it again, to be quite honest, I would actually set up the rewrite rules all in Netlify and not do them in StackPath. But whatever, they both work. Vercel, this is brand spanking new. This is a pretty new, I'm not sure if there was a way to do this before, but this way it gives you this is the JSON version of it. And you basically just have a file, and I can't remember what the file name is. I'll have to look up the documentation for that. But literally, same idea. You have a rewrite section of this config file, and you say the source and the destination, and you can have you can either have a wildcard. So this is more like a regex, looks like regex, which makes me uncomfortable, but it does work, it's great. Or you can have stuff where it's like passing a variable through into an API.
Yeah, like they even have an example here of like actually like proxying an API too, which is
yes. Yeah. And actually, so you talked about before about, hey, there's always a dynamic portion of your website. You can proxy the APIs through it so that you can beat things like, so you don't have to worry about cross-site things like ad blockers and stuff. And there's a lot of examples actually for Netlify in particular for saying, hey, you can proxy your Google Analytics through Netlify so that anybody who's blocking like Google Analytics, that won't block it because it'll all be coming through your own site. So there's a lot of different techniques that are in use here. But the big thing is now we have really clear idea to say portions of my website are going to this new way that we build stuff and portions to it aren't. And we've used it in the wild with our actual site. And from experience, I can say that this was an awesome thing to do because it got us out of, it's a mindset thing. A lot of stuff is just psychological. It got us out of, oh my gosh, everything needs to be in Azure and .NET because that's the way we've always done it. Well, that's not how we do it anymore because we were able to get out of that mindset. And it started just with the idea of we can do this. What are the gotchas, James?
The gotchas. Oh yeah. So yeah, remember, yeah. I don't remember.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's not just page. So like, you just need to be able to be careful about how you set up those rules, because, you know, with proxy, one thing you have to think about how CSS and JavaScript are going to be shared across the different sites. So for example, if you're, you know, showing someone your new website, you know, are there any elements on that page? Like, for example, do you need to share the header and footer, right? Do they need to have the same header and footer? I know in some of the, like I think you said Cloudflare and StackPath, you can actually write code that can actually grab and like dynamically inject the header and the footer and stuff too. Or you just, in your new site, when you build it, you just sort of, you know, build a new version of your header and footer for that microsite. Or you just try to replicate it in that, what you have in the rest of the site, so it kind of looks the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, the DNS one is the one that was the biggest gotcha. StackPath has a really easy way of just saying, I can CNAME or do an alias, like a top level alias for my DNS. Whereas Cloudflare doesn't like to do that. Cloudflare likes to take over your entire DNS and be your DNS server, your name server. And it gets even easier in an offering like Netlify, where you like the DNS setting up DNS in Netlify and Vercel is like dead simple. It is like bare bones. I don't need to learn any IT stuff to set up my DNS. So I think that's the thing for me. It's like these services make it easy to do DNS, because DNS is 0% fun.
Yeah.
Nobody likes it. And if you do like it, you're a special human.
And what about, I think one thing we should mention here too is, like, you know, we have, you know, our whole marketing team and stuff working on our website and making updates and things too. So, you know, what did they, how did they feel about, you know, the switch of moving from a traditional web server to JAMSTACK? Because the way in which they work with content and how they expect things to happen can actually change a little bit depending on when you're doing those things. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? You know, I should have created the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, the great thing is the website got much more reliable and way faster just out of the box without us having to scale anything up. So before, if we wanted to handle more traffic, we would have to scale up the site or try to fix things in code, which were difficult, like caching and stuff. So the site just got better, faster, and our UX got better. What got difficult is now there's two places, and as we evolved more sections, so it's like, hey guys, now the resources section has all been converted to JAMSTACK, and the question would be, okay, how do I preview that again? Where is that again? Even though there's literally only two URLs, there was the old URL and the new URL. It gets confusing for people because our lives are already complicated. So what I ended up doing, interestingly enough, was building a fake preview redirector that had the same logic that was in StackPath, in this, like saying, hey, if this URL, then go to here, if that URL, then go to there. So I just had those two different arrays of URLs, and I built a serverless function in Netlify to say, if you go to, if the preview is to this one, just automatically redirect the browser over to there, so that they can click preview on any link in Agility and go to the right spot. Once I did that, the marketing team got way happier, because before they're like, I can never find the page. I cannot
because
find it.
They're like, how do I preview the page? Which URL do I use? I forgot which website this thing is powering, right? So you're able to fix that by sort of adding some custom redirect logic back. It's smart enough to figure out what URL to actually send them to preview content.
Yeah, and the funny thing was, it took hours of me trying to explain to folks where things were, because it changed all the time. And it took me about 10 minutes to write that preview function.
Yeah.
So sometimes just writing a little bit of JavaScript code can make it easy for folks. So I think that thinking about, and it comes back to experiences. What's the best experience? I like JAMSTACK as a developer. So the developer experience for me on working on this site has been great. The editor experience, I had to do a little bit of work as a developer to make sure my editors had a great experience, but I had to consider them. And I think that being considerate of those experiences is like the top priority.
Yeah, and that was really what my last webinar was on, which is the, you know, giving love to your editor experience with GATSBY and Agility is, and you can find that on our YouTube channel if you want to check it out. But was that point where it's like, you know, JAMSTACK gives a great developer experience and also can give you great user experience because it's so fast and, you know, easy to develop on, fast to develop on when you get at it. the problem is the editor experience, right? The editors are coming from, a world of traditional CMS. We're talking WordPress, maybe you have a .NET site, a PHP site that, when an editor makes a change in the CMS, they can, either preview it or publish it. And then they go to the page, they load it, and they see that happen automatically, because that web server is responding to that request in real time. So it's making sure that it gets your latest content and you can see it easy and quick and go. So like that, that is what editors are accustomed to. And that is what, as JAMSTAck pioneers, we need to fix that and make JAMSTAck work that same manner, where it's like, I make an update, I want to see it, or I at least want to be able to know when I'm going to be able to see it. Because as we're talking about build processes and how long, a site might take to rebuild and redeploy, an editor doesn't want to, make a change in the CMS and then wait for an undefined amount of time to know when their site has been redeployed to verify that, everything does look okay and live. So that's why having a preview environment set up for JAMSTAck is absolutely critical.
Yes.
Whether you're doing it in Gatsby or Next, you got to have some sort of preview environment so editors can see that change happen in real time, and they can be confident when they hit that publish button. And then, when you actually do want to sort of update your live deployment where it needs to rebuild the whole site, you need editors to be able to be aware of when a build is happening, when it's finished. So I know, Joel, what you did as a sort of quick way to get around that is, there's just a message posted in our Slack channel to notify editors that, hey, your build that was automatically kicked off because you published something has now finished, and here's the URL.
I feel like you're about to drop a product hint right now.
I am. And so, we're finding that, to give that whole rounded experience, editors need to understand, they don't have to understand exactly how the DevOps works, but they need to know when their site is redeploying and when it's available for them to see and when that's done. And we want to make that a first-class citizen in the CMS. We think it belongs in there. So, on our roadmap, something that we're working on sort of next is actually integrating more with these build providers so that you can actually see as an editor when you're in the CMS when that stuff is happening. Because I think, we've already handled the previous stuff. We've also given editors the power of managing pages and what content is on each page. This is just sort of the next natural evolution to get that up to speed to match the editor experience that they are used to with the traditional CMS. And I think that's so important. And it's something that developers don't always think about. They always think about the user experience and the developer experience, but the editor experience is just as important. At the end of the day, they're the ones that are actually managing the website, and they have jobs to do, and it needs to be great for them too.
Awesome. Experience is a big deal. We have another webinar coming up. This one is going to focus on Next.js and Vercel and using those with Agility CMS. That's Thursday, August 27th.
And we'll actually have Lewis from Vercel actually join us as a special guest. So if you guys have any questions about Next.js or Vercel in general, definitely come to that. He's going to be there, and you can ask him any questions you'd like.
Yes. So that is the next one. The way to sign up for those events and future events, there will be lots more announced. Our fall lineup for webinars is coming up. We're going to keep on doing these webinars and trainings. Go to agilitycms.com/events to find those. I did post earlier on in the chat, I posted a link to our Slack channel. Please, please, please join that. We have quite a few people already in there. This is the best way to get in touch with us directly. Just send us a message. Hey, how do I do this? Hey, this is something that's confusing to me and I want to learn more about it. Do that. Jump onto GitHub. GitHub.com/agility is our GitHub. That's where all our code is. Great way to continue the conversation. As well, follow us on Twitter at Agility CMS. Of course, online, agilitysms.com, which is hosted on Netlify now, 100% JAMstack all the way. Get in touch with us as well if you have any sales type questions, sales@agilitysms.com. I also want to take a quick moment just to remind folks that these webinars are something that we're giving back to the community, where we want to just send knowledge out there. But any feedback that you guys have about how this worked, what was good, what was knowledge, where did we not enough kitten jokes, too many puppy things, I don't know, what kind of feedback, the quality sucked, the quality was great, we really want to know that. So DM us on our Twitter or email us anywhere. Reach out to us on Slack. We would definitely want to be connected. And I think that is the best way to learn and grow, is to get connected with folks in the communities where they are.
And I just wanted to address a couple comments in our chat here. Skunkworks Creative Group, love the name. Was talking about, you know, it'd be great if they could have some sort of WordPress plugin where they could sort of dynamically migrate stuff from WordPress into Agility. That's actually been something we've been, you know, sort of tinkering here and there for almost a couple of years now in terms of, you know, what we might do there. But that's a great idea. Like for someone to be able to be like, one click, all right, I want to switch from WordPress to Agility and just have all that stuff work. It's totally doable too. So I'll be curious to actually look into that a bit more. But at the very least, yeah, we should at least have a guide on our help site that sort of at least walks through the concept of what that might look like. He also added some, or he or she also added some insight that they work in an agency that they work exclusively with WordPress, and there's some internal resistance with JAMSTAck that it's sort of too developerish, and you know, doesn't really allow editors full control over things. And yeah, I've heard that feedback before too, and I think that's why you should definitely take a look at the last webinar that I did on, you know, giving love to your editor experience, because that addresses the pain points that I think you're talking about there and how you can solve those. And you know, without giving away too much, really page management and being able to preview stuff is key to that. So Agility takes a bit of a unique approach where we, you know, not only allow you to find sort of headless structured content, but we can also allow editors to define pages so they can manage your entire site tree and exactly what content is on each page. So, you know, when you set up a site like that, editors actually have full control over everything, just like they would with WordPress, and even more in some cases. So it really depends, you know, what headless CMS you go with and how you construct and architect your content. But definitely recommend checking out our video on our Agility CMS YouTube channel that talks about that in more detail. You can even share that with your manager if you'd like.
Yeah, I just posted a link to that in the chat, to that
thank you.
Give love to your ex.
Yeah,
in there for sure. So that's awesome. James, thanks for today. This is great. I love doing webinars with you, man. You got so much knowledge. It's great, and I love watching your dog. She looks so chill. And I want to thank everybody for joining in today. I did one person with their hand up. Okay, Roger Tuan. Do you want to say something, Roger? Maybe he put his hand up by accident.
But I would say, yeah, great questions, guys. Love that you guys were very engaged. It's awesome.
All right, thanks for coming, everybody. This has been great. Check out the events page for the upcoming webinars. And hey, let's keep at it. Take care, buddy.
Awesome.